Ja, når man med I en sånn kurskomité og synes man har liksom noenlunde snekret som et program, og hovedattraksjonen den første dagen sier han ikke kommer, så gir det en viss... det noen som gleder seg av adrenalinkick, men det ikke helt der. En viss mengde svette, kanskje ikke blod og tårer, men en viss mengde svette. Men vi har prøvd å snekre sammen ting allikevel, og det første vi skal gjøre å høre dette foredraget hans. Han amerikaner, og han snakker her til amerikanere, så vi må skjerpe den engelskspråklige delen av hjernen vår. Den tekstet, så jeg håper vi klarer å følge med på teksten, for det spennende det han inne på, som Arne har begynt å snakke om. For jeg tror det kommer til å endre jobbsituasjonen deres I de neste årene. Så derfor så må vi følge med på dette egentlig. Jeg håper vi klarer å følge med på det altså da tenker jeg på den situasjonen. Så håper jeg klarer å følge med på foredraget. For å gjøre det litt enklere så har jeg tatt ut PowerPoint-slidene som, eller vi, så dere har fått handouts, så dere kan skrive på dem som kommer I fortløpende. Det det dere fikk nå mens vi... Har ikke alle fått? Nei, vi kopierte kanskje ikke opp. Vi var ikke sikre på hvor mange som kom til å komme inn på den første sesjonen. Det jo hyggelig at det så mange. Jeg husker ikke hvor mange Arne kopierte opp. Ok, ja, det tydelig for lite. Kan vi ikke si at dere får dele litt på dem nå, og så får vi skaffe fram flere? Beklager det. Men det var for 100 av dere, så det hjelp I handouts. Ok, så da kjører vi hardt. Den her var bare 57 minutter, så jeg håper dere klarer å følge med på det han sier. Og så skal vi prøve å få direkte kontakt senere I dag. Han må stå opp 4:30, eller han må stå opp litt før det, da, håper jeg. For å treffe oss, men det skal vi se på etterpå. Vi kjører hardt. Har vi lyd? Vi har egentlig lyd, du må bare kjøre den opp. Ok, you say so. Gir ikke mindre svette selvfølgelig. Ja, jeg skal starte på begynnelsen. Den der skulle jeg I hvert fall kutte litt. Jeg trodde jeg hadde full lyd på maskinen min.
When I talk about hearables, I'm talking about a very broad definition. I'll give you my definition in a little bit. But
det var litt rart den virka I stedet.
There's some kinds of hearing aids, PSAPs, and other devices. So they call this the gig economy, and I have a gig with several different people after listed here on the slide, and I'm obligated to show you that. And that looks like a picture of me and you right there. That's actually
det må være som gjør at den her ikke virker. Ja, men den ikke god nok.
And I'm guessing that this group is pretty savvy, and they may have heard about a few of the things that are happening with respect to PSAPs and the National Pathway of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I put this in only because I've given a similar talk now about 20, 30 times in the last year or so, and I'm always astounded by the number of audiologists that don't know anything about PSAPs or the you may have noticed in the program, there were two presenters. Not quite loud enough. All right, well, it's a cue to raise the voice. My presenting partner, who is from Zimbabwe, she couldn't make it, Jenny Peterson, so you may have noticed that. I've actually never met her, but we were doing the same session. She's not here, so I'm going to cover a little bit of the material I think that she was going to cover. So The title of my presentation is The Sky is Rising, Integrating Hearables into Patient-Centered Care. When I talk about hearables, I'm talking about a very broad definition in a little bit, but it encompasses some kinds of hearing aids, PSAPs, and other devices. So they call this the gig economy, and I have a gig with several different people that are listed here on the slide, and I'm obligated to show you that. And that looks like a picture with me and you right there, but it's actually a Kumar. And I'm guessing that this group is pretty savvy, and they may have heard about a few of the things that are happening with respect to PCAS and the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I put this in only because I've given this similar talk now about 20, 30 times in the last year or so, and I'm always astounded by the number of audiologists that don't know anything about PCAS or the IOM or the NAS findings. Just in the last few days, there was an over-the-counter hearing aid act that was submitted to Congress. You probably heard about that at this meeting as well. And next month, the National Academy of Sciences is going to have another meeting on some of their findings. So before we go too far there, I don't want to scare people too much. And the sky is not falling, even with some of these new products that are hitting the market. We know from a report that comes out of the UK that analyzes our industry that the number of hearing aids from 2015 to 2020 is going to go up by about 600,000 units. And that's even with the knowledge of some of these things that might change with respect to over-the-counter hearing aids. We know the private market grew 13% from June of 2015 to June of 2016. And a report just came out last week that I read, a guy by the name of Nick Hunn. Some of you might know that name. He writes a lot of papers on hearables. You can probably find that on the web, Y4 Consulting. And in that paper, he says that he didn't expect any major market disruptions within our industry for the next 5 years. So you can take that for what it might be worth. A couple other things why the sky might not be falling. And you can make the argument that traditional hearing aids are likely to remain the gold standard for a number of our patients for the next few more years. We'll talk a little bit about that and why that may or may not be happening. And I also want to kind of sell you on the idea that there might be some clinical advantages to what are called self-contained or self-fitting hearing aids and hearables. I think they can free up a lot of your time. In fact, I would argue that in about the next generation of audiologists, some of you are probably sitting in the room, you'll probably laugh at how we use programming tables and software and spend a lot of time adjusting and tinkering with the hearing aids. Kind of like some of us laugh about the old trimmers that we used 20 years ago. And I think also, in the era of customer-driven healthcare, that it's always good to offer patients more choices. We can unbundle services, we can be more creative in our approach. We can find some cases are more complex than others, they need more of our clinical time. And really, when you use that kind of an approach, it really doesn't matter where they get the device. It's really the professional time that you can bill for. So even though the sky might be falling, some things that you really need to pay attention to, and I focused on more of this in the talk I did this morning, but we know that between 67% and 86% of adults age 50 and over with hearing loss don't use hearing aids, and that number shouldn't be too surprising. You've heard that in a lot of different places, I'm hoping. Along with that, we know that because of a lot of the research that people like Frank Lin have done and others, that untreated hearing loss is a looming public health crisis. We have this collision of knowing about the link between hearing loss and dementia and depression, social isolation, and the growing baby boomer population. That kind of creates this looming public health crisis. And then for various reasons, we are all in this era of customer-driven healthcare where we're looking for lower costs, broader access, and higher quality. And we play a role in that because all of us are healthcare providers. So how I like to look at this is if you go back 5 or 6 years to 2010, and PSAPs have been around for a long time. They're not new, but they started to get a little bit more publicity within our industry around 2010. If you went into a Walmart or a Target or any other kind of place like that, you would see devices like this, kind of off the shelf, $20 price point. I think I took this picture in Michigan several years ago when I was on a fishing trip. It was in like a bait and tackle shop or something like that. So you can find them anywhere. But now, over the last few years, we've moved from this term PSAP to hearable. It's kind of a, a cooler term, maybe more fashionable, and there's a person there that's wearing one in one of the Mission Impossible movies, some version of a hearable. And sticking with the Tom Cruise theme, show me the money, we know that this is an important thing to take consideration of, because between 2014 and 2015, the amount of investment into the industry, the hearable industry, about tripled. So obviously, people are paying attention. And it's now that a lot of these products, some I should say, not a lot, but some of these products are starting to hit the market. And we'll talk about what those are in a minute. So here's my definition of a hearable. It's a little bit like a hearing aid, and it's a little bit like a consumer electronic product. Some are more like a hearing aid, some are more like a consumer electronic product. But it's a morphing of these two technologies. So you have hearing aids on one side, which are that stodgy medical device. You usually take a lot of appointments to get them fitted. That's the traditional model. There's certainly a stigmatizing factor. For a lot of patients, they're perceived as being expensive. And then on the other side of the equation, you have consumer electronics. And who doesn't like a nice flat screen TV? Who doesn't like a pair of nice wireless Turtle Beach or Bose headphones? They have a coolness factor. They're off the shelf, they have mass appeal, wide range of prices, but usually related relative to hearing aids, less expensive. And hearables are sort of some combination of the two. And when I talk about this, you'll see there's a spectrum of hearables. Some are a little bit more like a traditional device that we fit, and others are more like a consumer electronic product that you would get off the shelf. Some hearables go in the ear, and I think there's at least one category where you don't have anything in your ear. It's more like a speaker. So let's look at this category. I call it the bizarre world of hearables. One of the main points I want you to take from this is that there's a wide range of quality, and if you have a 2cc coupler and a probe mic in your office, you can do some pretty quick and easy evaluation of any of these products. And if you don't have one of those, where's John Comfort? He's back there. You can see him afterwards. I had to put a plug in for John. So here's my spectrum of hearables. We'll start with the ones that are a little bit more like traditional hearing aids. And I would say there's two categories: smartphone-enabled and self-contained hearing aids. So there's the difference is a self-contained hearing, it allows you to do the testing and the programming, the fitting, the adjustment all off of an iPad or a smartphone. And a smartphone-enabled would be just fitting and adjusting the hearing, where the test is done separately. Maybe you enter the audiogram in, maybe you don't. Then, of course, we have PSAPs. Some PSAPs are off the shelf. You don't do anything with them. Some have a toggle switch. Others allow you to use the smartphone to make some adjustments. We have another category that I call directed audio devices, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Then we have ones called augmented reality devices. Another term that you might hear is layered listening. Those are the ones like that essentially put the Fitbit and the iPod into your ear, so they have multi-purpose functionality. And then we have amplification smartphone-based apps. And of course, it's a wide spectrum. Some of them cross over a little bit. And before we go any further, though, I think it's really important your audiology cap on and ask yourself the question, what are the basic characteristics of amplification? We're not talking about what are the basic characteristics of a hearing aid, but what are the basic characteristics of amplification in the ear? And can that be delivered in an over-the-counter product? So here is how I would answer that question. And we have one of the citations of this in the audience here, which is kind of cool. But this is my definition of what a basic high-fidelity hearing aid would do. Hopefully you all know the name Edgar Pilcher, passed away a few years ago. One of the true pioneers in our industry, along with me, who's right here in the audience. But smooth, wideband frequency response that closely matches a prescriptive target, like the now or the DSL. Undistorted output. Something it's called unity gain, but basically more gain for soft and average and transparent for loud. And then you might remember the old term core-fig, polar response for flat insertion gain, but it basically has to stay true to the ear canal, no peaky responses, it matches the utter, the resonance of the ear canal. So the question is, I think all of us know, especially if you do probe mic measures, that you can do that really easily with software and even a few channels of, or bands of compression. But the question is, can you do that with an over-the-counter self-contained hearing aid or with a PSAP? And we'll kind of talk about that over the next few minutes. So that's my definition that I want to share. That's the question and the definition that I want to think about as we go through these slides. Let's look at smartphone-enabled hearing aids. So back to the spectrum. They allow, some of these are on the market today. Programming and adjustment and remote mic capability are all done with the smartphone. So you have the made for iPhone, the made for Android hearing aids that would fall into this category. More like a hearing aid, less like a consumer electronic product. But remember, the idea here is that the patient, not the provider, would be driving the fitting and adjustment process. Then we have self-contained hearing aids. Again, something that's sort of in the pipeline, maybe not available yet commercially, but the idea here is that you would not only fit and adjust the hearing aid, but you would also, the patient would complete the test with their iPad or their tablet PC. And there's a company, there's several that are working on this that I know of. This one comes out of Australia that are working on these self-contained hearing aids. So there's a little bit of a difference between the two, self-contained and self-programmed. Actually, just this year, we're about to hit the presses. If you're a member of AAA, you could go to the website and find this article. This is a study that comes out of Australia, and this is a really good one to know about because you get a lot of pushback about those 60, 70, 80-year-olds. Are they savvy enough? Are they sophisticated enough to program and fit their own hearing aid? Well, in this particular study, they used a product called the Sound World Solutions. They actually have a hearing aid and they have a PSAP. In this study, they used the hearing aid. They took 40 adults, half of them were experienced hearing aid users, the other half were inexperienced. And you can see they were between the ages of 68 and 88, a pretty typical age that you would see in your practice of a hearing aid user. And they had no instruction on how to do this. Some of them had very little experience with using a smartphone or a tablet PC. And with the instruction booklet, or maybe it was on the iPad probably, with the electronic instruction booklet, with a little bit of help from their spouse, 73% of the participants were able to successfully insert the devices, and 55% were able to completely do the 10-step process of fitting and adjusting both of these RIC products in the ear. So you can kind of look at this study as glass is half empty or glass is half full. I mean, 55% of people that are of that age bracket that have very little experience and interaction with computers, that's a pretty high number, that 55% of them can successfully fit the product. But on the other hand, you know, maybe there's a need for an audiologist for the other 45% that have some assistance. So you can see here there's some issues, I think, with respect to how do you sort those patients out that can do this successfully versus those that might struggle. Let's look a little bit at personal sound amplification products. So what you'll notice in this slide is that some, more than others, look like hearing aids. And there are a lot of these on the market. It's really, actually, I think, a little bit hard to keep up with. You can go to the Consumer Electronics, their website, and you'll see somewhere on that website a list of many of these. Some of you may have heard of the SoundHawk. Rodney Perkins, one of the founders of Resound, created that product. Some of you might know about the Etmotic product. Has the K-amp in it. Then we have the ICOT. This was developed by an ENT in Georgia, I believe, by the name of Chip Goldsmith. He's part of that company that's bringing this to market. Excellent Schoolie Light. Used to be a hearing aid. Now it's labeled as a PSAP. 5 or 10 years ago, I know that product was available as a hearing aid. Then we have another product called Sound World Solutions. So I'm just showing you just the tip of the iceberg with respect to PSAPs. So a couple things, you probably know this, but it bears some repeating. You know, the real difference in a lot of cases between a PSAP and a hearing aid is just simply the hearing aids have gone through the regulatory channel and the PSAP does not. In fact, there are companies that have virtually the same product. One is labeled a hearing aid because it's gone through the FDA regulation process, and the PSAP has not. But here, sort of at a high level, some of the key differences between a PSAP and a hearing aid. You can see the price points are different. One is potentially covered by insurance and the other is not. One is sort of accepted as the gold standard of care, and the other one, as you'll see in a minute, I think, there's a tremendous range of sound quality. Here's an example of a product. This is the Sound World Solutions. It's essentially the same product. One has gone through the FDA regulatory process and the other is not. You'll notice this one is labeled as a PSAP. It's got the receiver that's in the ear looks more like a Bluetooth headset relative to the hearing aid that's got the more traditional coupling. And then you'll notice for the features, they're the same, and the battery life's about essentially the same, and the price points are different. So that's something we'll talk about in a minute as well. But it's important to know that there are several companies out there that have products that look, essentially they're the same. One's labeled a PSAP, one's labeled a hearing aid. And there's a lot of recent comparative studies. So if you're thinking that there's not a lot of data out there about how PSAPs might work relative to hearing aids, there are actually several studies, a lot of these in the trade journals. A couple come from Johns Hopkins. Chase Smith, who's in the audience, is from, formerly at Northwestern, published one a few months back. There's one this month in the Hearing Review, and there's one that was published about a year ago by some audiologists, I think, from Singapore. But before I show you some of the results from those studies, I just want to do a quick sidebar here, because I think as an audiologist, it's really important to be a good consumer of the literature and of the research, and be able to analyze a study and thank you. Am I supposed to throw this to the crowd or something? Anybody want a t-shirt? Need a t-shirt cannon for this group. So my point here, before I show you some of the data, that it's really important, just like for any other study that you would evaluate, that you take the time to look at how the study was designed, what the question they were trying to ask, how they analyzed the study, because depending on how they set it up, the results, it can really affect the results. So, for example, if it's a laboratory study, it's really easy to contrive the environment so that you can get what you're looking for by just where you set the speakers up and how you arrange it, depending on the product and what you want the study to say. On the other side, it's always good to have some real-world evidence. What happens when the patient takes the product or takes the device out to the real world? And of course, you can't really use objective testing for that. It's not like you can do a % correct or something when they're in the real world. So you rely on questionnaires on a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 scale, looking at benefit and satisfaction. And the drawback with those, of course, is that a patient might have some memory problems. Maybe you don't have them complete questionnaire until they come into the office and it's been a week since they've had the product for 2 weeks. And maybe you have them keep a diary, but they don't do the diary till the end of the day, and they might forget from the time they were wearing the hearing aids or the PSAP environment, and then 6 hours later they reported in the diary. But what's overcome that is there's actually an application that researchers are now using, and you'll see this in some studies in the near future in audiology with hearing aids. But you can now ping the patient with the smartphone and have them use the phone to rate their experiences with the hearing aids or the PSAPs in real time. So it's instantaneous self-report data, and I think that adds to the value when you can do it in real time like that. So my main point is to make sure that you're a critical evaluator of the literature and don't be misled by how the study was designed or how the results were reported. And it's also important to keep in mind the placebo effect. So how many of you know, for example, there's a very classic study that Ruth Bentler at Iowa did maybe 15 years ago, where she took a set of digital hearing aids. Patients wore the hearing aids, they knew they were digital, and they did a series of measures to see how they benefited, what the performance was. Then she took the hearing aids back and gave them another set of hearing aids that were labeled analog. And they were the same hearing aids. The digital hearing aids and the analog hearing aids were exactly the same, but when they were labeled as digital, the patient reported higher outcomes. And that study was actually repeated again in a UK study maybe a year or two ago that said exactly the same thing. So the point is what you say to the patient, this is the best hearing aid ever, this has got 25 channels of compression, whatever it is, there's a halo effect. And we have to be aware of that, good, bad, and different. You could argue that the placebo effect can be a good thing. If patients, that halo effect, we could use it to our advantage. And I don't have it in this presentation, but I would also urge you to read the studies that came out of Robin Cox's lab, published in Ear and Hearing, that compared high performance, or I should say high-end hearing aids with lower-end hearing aids. So you all know the good, better, best technology tiers. They took a tier 1 and a tier 3 hearing aid, and in a series of measures found that there was no significant difference in benefit between those two tiers of technology. And that study was published in a couple of different places. And I know the University of Iowa has done a very similar study, and the results were essentially the same. And the bottom line message from those studies is that cost doesn't really drive patient outcome. So it's a really important study and series of studies to take a look at. But back to PSAPs, I just wanted to share with you some of the things. It's important when you're sitting in your practice to critically evaluate some of the literature, some of the research that's been done. This was a study that appeared in the American Journal of Medicine. These are from the Johns Hopkins group. Sarah Mamo, who's now at the University of Massachusetts, I think was the lead author here. And you can see they evaluated 5 different PSAPs. And you can see some of the characteristics they were looking at here: signal-to-noise ratio, listening comfort, user features, price. There's a section there on the website. But if it had a green check mark, that meant it had that feature was fully available. If it had a yellow circle, that means it was partially available, and the X was that it wasn't available. And you'll notice there's a lot of green checks there. So that gives you some evidence that some of these PSAPs have very similar functionality to traditional hearing aids. Another study, Chase is here in the room. I'm tempted to have you come up and talk through this. Now you don't want to do that? But this is a really interesting study that was published a few months ago in Hearing Review, looking at 11 devices. He actually used 2cc coupler and real ear measures. And here are the devices that he looked at. Now notice there's a nice mix here of low and high-end PSAPs. Pocket Talker was lumped into the high-end PSAP. There's the Sound World Solution product, the SoundHawk. You can see the Ear Machine is an app that you can download on your phone. It was a whole $1 when you did this. I think it's free now, but you got the more expensive version. The $8 Woodland Whisper. I guess you went to the big tackle shop like I did to get that one. And then you have the Cyber Science amplifier. Then you have hearing aids. You have the Etymotic Bean, the Hansaton product, and the MD Hearing Aid Pro, which I don't know if too many of us have fit that. It's probably one of those that's a mail order hearing aid, is my guess. Pardon me? Yeah, okay, so that, but it's labeled, as FDA approved to be called a hearing aid, right? So it's there. And then you have a couple of high-end products. You have the Phonak product and you have the Resound product. You can see what those prices are. So we did some electroacoustic analysis. And these are the things that he looked at. He looked at the difference between the OSPL90 for a high-frequency average and the low-frequency average. So kind of looking at the frequency response to see if it was flat or if there was more emphasis in the lows or the highs. equivalent input noise, total harmonic distortion, and directionality. And now the results here are really, really interesting. So first you'll see the difference between the output at 90 and at a high frequency, between the high frequency and the low frequency, the difference between the two. And the shorter the bar, the flatter the frequency response, essentially, right, Chase? Yeah, so just want to make sure. And you'll notice that a lot of these products have a number that's 5 or less, meaning that the high frequencies and the low frequencies have about the same amount of energy. Then you'll notice there are 3 products that have pretty long bars: the Cyberscience, the Whisper, and the Ear Machine, meaning there's a lot more energy or gain in the lows relative to the highs. And then there's equivalent input noise, which is basically circuit noise. How noisy is the hearing aid? And you'll notice here, the higher the number, the poorer the performance, the noisier the product. And you'll notice some of these products, the Whisper, the Cyberscience, have numbers above 40, above 38, 34. Again, if you're fitting somebody with a mild hearing loss, there's a pretty good chance they're going to be hearing some circuit noise with some of these products. And then another measure, total harmonic distortion. And again, low bars are what you're looking for. And then you'll see, again, the MD hearing, here's the MD Hearing Aid Pro perform the poorest on this measure of total harmonic distortion, the Pocket Talker. And then you see some other products down here, the Beam, the Phonax product, the SoundHawk, Cyberscience. So these are all measures that you could do in your own clinic if you have the equipment. And then finally, directionality. So, of course, you'd have to have a directional microphone in the hearing aid to get some of these results. A lot of PSAPs have omnidirectional microphones. But you'll notice here the 2 hearing aids perform the best. The higher the number, the better the directional benefit. And really the kind of the rule of thumb here is if you get a number that's better than 5, then the patient's going to notice the difference between the omni and the directional mode. So you'll notice both hearing aids are better than 5. The SoundHawk is better than 5. In a lot of these other ones, I really wouldn't expect that to happen because they don't have directional microphones. So, you know, you could argue, do you even need a directional microphone in some of these products? Another good question that you might have is, here's 2 different hearing aids. This is another reason why it's important to know the test environment and how the hearing aid reacts when you set up the test environment, because you have 2 different, and maybe Chase, I don't know, put you on the spot here, but why did the Bolero have such a different number than the Sound product on this test? It's probably a byproduct of the automatic null steering. You just got the sweet spot for the Phonak and not for the design. So anyway, again, the bottom line is you can see a range of performance differences across 3 or 4 important variables, and these are things you can do very easily in your practice. And the other part that he did, I took it one step further and took it out of the coupler and put it onto KeyMar. And kind of an interesting way that he did this. How closely did he match a NAL2 target for 10 audiometric configurations? So each device was adjusted to match 9 targets at 3 input levels: soft, average, and loud. So if you count all those variables up, all the different frequencies, and the 3 different input levels, you get a total possible score of 27. And we can talk about this maybe over a beer, but plus or minus 10 is a pretty liberal criteria. So anyway, that's okay. But how closely did it get to the target for those 3 input levels across those frequencies, plus or minus 10? And there was a range of flat, moderately sloping, and steeply sloping. So basically entering all these audiograms into the fitting software and then seeing how close you got to the target when you fit the product on KeyMar. And I don't know if this is the most current version of the slide, but the bottom line here is if it's in green, that shows you that you can pretty accurately fit that loss with the particular product. So for example, look at the moderate category. Of course, you see the hearing aids, that's not too surprising, you would expect that. But then the SoundHawk, the ear machine, the Sound World Solutions, all were 88% or better. It fit the loss pretty successfully. If you look over here on the other side, steeply sloping, you'll notice for moderate to severe, only the hearing aid could hit the target, and some of the other products, the Bean, the ear machine, were able to do the very mild and the mild. So the idea here, as you can see, some of these products have a fairly wide fitting range, similar to the hearing aids. So if you kind of look at his final results, or what's the bottom line here, that you can see hearing aids have a lot more flexibility, as you would expect. They fit a wider range of losses. If you're using now targets as kind of your gold standard. But there are some products out there that actually are quite good. They closely match what a hearing aid would be. There was another study, this was presented, I don't know if this has been published or not, but it's been presented at a couple of different scientific meetings. This is from the Nick Reed, Sarah Mammo. They come from Johns Hopkins University. And this was presented at a conference a little over a year ago. And I think there was another version of this that was at a conference earlier this year. They compared 9 high-end PSAPs to 1 low-end device. And this is what they found. So again, this is taking it another step further and evaluating the products in noise, which of course is a very challenging situation, something that we face on a daily basis. How do some of these PSAPs compare to traditional hearing aids? So you'll notice here you have the premium hearing aid, and you have 2 PSAPs, the Bean and the Sound World Solutions. They did the Quicksyn and the words and noise, and then a fairly challenging test. Fixed 55 dB plus 5 signal to noise ratio, and this is showing you the difference in percent correct. So you have the hearing aid here, aided versus unaided. Then you that's absolute difference between unaided and aided for the hearing aid and the 2 PSAPs. And you'll notice that there's very little difference, especially between the Sound World Solution and the hearing aids. And if you look at the study more closely, you'll find that four of the PSAPs in this study, 4 out of the 9, performed very similar to hearing aids for a fairly challenging test: word recognition, speech recognition in background noise. So again, I think that shows you what the capability is for some of these products. And slide it, please. So the skinny here on PSAPs, I would say, looking at what, based on what I've read and some of the work, the work I've done with my own 2cc coupler, a lot of these are de-featured hearing aids with low gain and output. They have a huge range of sound quality and prices. And some of them perform pretty similar for mild and moderate hearing losses. And again, I want to just emphasize the point that it's always good to gather the basic acoustical facts of any product that you have in your office, and you can do that with your test equipment very easily when you have some time. The next group of products I want to look at are what are called smart wireless earbuds. Another name for these, augmented reality or layered listening. So these are more like consumer electronic products and maybe a little bit less like hearing aids. And there are tons of these products that are hitting the market. And I think the name of the website is hearable.world. If you go to that website, you'll see a lot of these products. A lot of them, they try to use crowdsourcing to fund them. And they get a lot of money and they really don't go anywhere. So it's kind of a wild west with respect to getting these products off the ground. The AirPod, which I think is just hitting the market now from Apple, could possibly be lumped into this category. So these are wireless earphones that do some different things. There are a lot of them that have been recently introduced or about to be introduced. I have about 4 slides that have names like the AZ Bro and the Jabra. You'll notice there's an asterisk by some of them. It says on their website that they incorporate hearing aid technology. So I'm not 100% sure what that means because some of these products haven't launched yet, so you can't really evaluate them. But they say that. I think you can buy the Jabra at like a Best Buy. You'll see that there's a wide range of prices. There's more. You know, names like Skybuds and Earring, Motorola Verb 1. There's the website that you might want to check out that has longer lists. But again, a lot of these have not been vetted in a way that we would look at them. Here are some of the features that you'll find in these augmented reality devices, wireless headphones. Hearing protection, biometrics, audio curation. I think that's kind of like having a soundboard inside your ear. You can do some different things with sound effects inside the earbud. Music, audio playback, something called Internet of Voice. I think the idea there is they're trying to get people, you know, kind of futuristically, getting them away from looking at a screen and talking to Siri. You also, the movie, you know the movie Her, where the guy kind of falls in love with the virtual person. Well, that's kind of, you know, one of the applications here is you get away from your screen and you use this device to talk to the computer. Siri on steroids, I guess. And then, of course, one of the other product features would be amplification. So it's, you know, why not give them a little bit of boost so they can hear better? So you see some of these products that are on the market now. A lot of you, this got a lot of traction in our industry, the Braggy Dash. This takes things from the Fitbit that it's on the wrist, puts it in the ear, you swipe it, you move your head, you can turn it on and off, you can listen to music. It's got a function called transparency on versus transparency off. And I think in the next slide you see, put the batteries down. Here's an example of a very crude measurement that you can do on the coupler, but you'll see here with the transparency on in the coupler, you get a little boost, not really a boost, but try to overcome the effects, I think, when it's in the ear, so it's not acting like an earplug. So these are some things that you can evaluate in your practice, and just to show you the kind of geek I am, over the summer I had a portable 2cc or acoustic analyzer in my basement where I ran some of these measurements, and I'm hoping that John can get me. I don't want to rely on the portable one because the screenshots don't look very good. Another one of these products are the Doppler Labs here. This one has got some, it's called tune in versus tune out function. So you can see it's, you know, uses a little bit more hipster language, I guess. The tune in function, 15 filters allow you to change the quality of the sound. It's sort of like a studio mixing effects. You know, they call it audio curation, I think. The tune out, it's got 9 different attenuation settings. Depending on the environment in, you can set the attenuation differently. I believe they're launching a new model this month. Maybe does a few more of these things. In the coupler, you can see, here's the Etymotic product. Again, it's hard to see number 4. And then you can see this ear device with 3 of those different audio curation settings and how they compare to another PSAP that's on the market. So not really something that's an amplification device per se at this point. It's just something that's good to know about. And again, you can evaluate these things in your office. So the skinny on these wireless earbuds and augmented reality devices, I think we're really seeing the first generation of them. You know, I would undoubtedly going to get more sophisticated over the next few years. Some of them provide, I would say, minimal amplification, but not really anything that you could use in your practice at this point. It's really only enough to overcome the effects of plugging the ear canal with the device. So it's not a viable alternative to hearing aids yet, in my opinion, but stay tuned for details. And then we have the final category of PSAPs, or of hearables, and that's smartphone-based amplification apps. So the idea here is you take the you take your wired earbuds today. Now we can do a little show and tell. If you get web service, you might take out your phone if you have a pair of wired earbuds. You can download the app if you don't have it. So here's an example of one, Ear Machine. You could download. Anybody have it on their phone right now? Yeah. So in my mind right now, this replaces a pocket talker. You know, pocket talkers are okay, but they're really old-fashioned. In my opinion, we don't use them a lot because they're just kind of stodgy. But this is still wired, but you can plug it in, and it turns the microphone here into the hearing aid microphone. Essentially, it's a body aid. You can adjust it. It's got some sophisticated amplification in it. There are other ones that are on the market, but this is one that I'm most familiar with. The Jacoby, another one that here at this show. I'm sure some of you have already had an experience with that. Same kind of thing. You download the hearing aid algorithm onto the app, and you essentially turn your smartphone into a body aid. So at this point, as far as I know, you have to have a wired set of earphones to use these, and there's some fairly big constraints to that. But they have some very advanced signal processing, WDRC, noise reduction. I was involved in a study with the Ear Machine, smartphone, and wired earbuds, and we found in our study that in laboratory measures it performed the same as a economy line hearing aid. The measures of speech and noise, word recognition and noise, no difference between the smartphone and the bare bones hearing aid. Another category of products, so we're going to move away from things that are all in the ear to some things that you might wear around your neck, or some speakers that you can customize in your house. So here's a couple of, I call these directed audio devices. One comes from Israel called the Smart Assistive Listening Transceiver. And what you'll notice here is you wear that around your neck, and then it's got a pair of wired earphones again, and you would plug into it. It also has a telecoil feature you could use with a pair of existing hearing aids if you want. And then there's another one, I think this one comes from France, called the TO First. Again, it's kind of worn on the body, but then there's earphones that go in, and the amplification, the algorithms are resting here. And there was actually a study published on this earlier this year. So this is a device, I guess you could call it an ALD, a directed audio device. It's something that's worn around your neck with earphones. And they sent 31 adults home on a 40-day trial with this device. And there was 48% mean improvement on word recognition and noise scores in the aided condition. And you can see, as far as the real-world outcome reports, actually did comparable to the hearing aid. So again, maybe an entry-level kind of product. And then there's another product. I have to disclose that I work with this company, just so you're all clear about that. This is called Hypersound. It's a company called Turtle Beach, and it uses ultrasonic energy to turn air into sound. When you sit in front of these emitters, you can be several feet away, and it sounds like you have headphones on. And so with this device, you don't have anything that you wear around your neck. You don't have anything that you wear in your ear. You just sit down in front of the speaker, and you can tune it like you do a hearing aid, so you can boost the high frequencies for those that need it, and it works quite well. Here's a schematic of how it works. The person that needs the amplification for the television, so it's really a home audio device that's intended primarily for television use. The person using Hypersound is sitting in the gray chair. The ultrasonic energy is being transmitted here to him in this chair. The person in the black sofa is able to listen to the television through the conventional audio. And again, it's for somebody that's not ready or not wanting to wear a hearing aid when they're watching television. It works quite well. In fact, I was involved in a study at Washington University that's going to be published in a few months. And we showed that there's about a 6 dB signal-to-noise improvement with the Hypersound unit relative to conventional television audio. So essentially what that's saying is that you can turn the volume down and hear and understand more of the dialogue, even when there's noise background effectively. So there's some data to back up that this product works as well. So you can think of these products more or less as the 21st century ALD, something that you don't necessarily wear in your ear, but you wear around your body, set it up as a speaker. All right, so I think the important question here is there's a range of products out there. I think every month you look, there's more and more of these products hitting the market. The question really is how do you incorporate these products into your clinic? Is there a place for them? Is it potentially going to cannibalize your existing hearing aid business? I think that's a very real, pertinent kind of question that we have to ask ourselves. So I'll give you a couple of different opinions on this and a little bit of data to back them up. One opinion is that you can think of some of these devices as a gateway or a starter solution. For somebody that's not, can't afford hearing aids, somebody that isn't ready for hearing aids yet, maybe these devices have some utility. And in my opinion on this is, the less it looks like a hearing aid, the more likely it would be a good gateway product. Because I think it might be a little bit of a mistake to just say this PSAP here, which costs a little bit less, you could use this as a gateway product, but it still has the stigmatizing factor. But you take a product that looks more like a Bluetooth headset, that looks more like, you know, consumer audio device, I think that could be viewed as a starter kind of a solution for somebody that's very mild to moderate. Here's a study that I was involved with Amin Amlani, and here's a possible way that you could use a smartphone-based, the ear machine. So this right here. And the idea was, we took 30 patients, half of them refused hearing aids, all of them we would consider them hearing aid candidates. They had a typical mild to moderate sloping loss. Half of them weren't ready to wear hearing aids yet. The other half had worn hearing aids and they returned them for credit. Has that ever happened to anybody? We looked at basically looked at their attitudes with respect to getting help for their hearing, their attitudes with coping, their motivation, their expectations. That's what all of these different standardized scales are intended to measure. And what we found after 4 weeks of use with this was that their outlook towards amplification improved significantly. They had a chance to play around with it. They saw that it worked. They had no risk involved because they were just using their phone and wired earphones. And that might be a good first step in getting somebody prepared for more conventional amplification. You're sort of breaking the barrier on using something for their health. So that might be a way to introduce these into your practice. The other point that I want to get across, and I showed this earlier this morning, is if you look at hearing aid use as a function of degree of hearing loss, we know that people that are in this mild to high frequency moderate category, 90% of them don't wear hearing aids. And they don't even view themselves as having a hearing problem because they don't even come in to see you. And I would argue that the medical channel that we've built over the last 40 or 50 years as audiologists isn't built to serve these patients because they don't view themselves as having a problem, so why should they come in and see you? They view themselves as having, normal hearing for their age, and they need an enhancement in 1 or 2 situations. And in that type of a model, it's more direct to consumer. They are looking for more of an anonymous transaction where they can go to a website. So one idea, we talked about this morning if you were there, for those of you that are entrepreneurs, how about a website where a person could go through a decision tree to find out if they should come in and see you, or if they can maybe wear something off the shelf. Because these people are going to come in and see you anyway. Maybe there's a way to move some of them to your office in a low-risk way where there's more interaction. The other interesting part about this is we know that there's a huge percentage of the population, about 12% of adults, according to one study published last year from the University of Washington, that have normal audiograms, but some self-perceived communication problems. So we don't even consider them as part of the market, but I would argue that those patients need some type of situational, off-the-shelf solution. As they get older, they probably will need more comprehensive care, so why not get them started earlier with something that's more like a consumer electronic product that doesn't require multiple visits, And then as they get older, as their needs change, they're a patient of yours sooner. And maybe you can do that through some type of a website where it's more of an anonymous transaction. You know, and audiologists, I think, we're responsible for quality control.